Welcome to the deep dive. We've gathered a pretty significant stack of research here, all focused on business ethics and professionalism, specifically in financial services. Our goal today, well, it's to really cut through all that information and pull out the key insights for you. You want to understand why the conduct rules have changed so much and, how the industry is adapting.
And it's crucial we talk about this now. This isn't just theoretical. If you think back, the global financial crisis, those issues with high charges, insurance claims not being paid out, scandals like Libor rigging.
Yeah, a lot of damage done there.
Exactly. The common denominator was this huge loss of consumer trust. Our sources are clear. The financial services sector, well, partly due to pressure from the regulator, the FCA, has really been pushed to put ethics and professionalism right at the heart of how they do business.
Okay, so let's unpack that core tension straight away because it seems to frame everything else. The gap between just acting lawfully and acting truly ethically.
Yes, the law, you see, that's the baseline, it's the minimum standard. But in financial services today, the expectation, the ethical one, is much higher. Think of it like a ceiling. The material gives a really good example, quite stark actually. An insurer might turn down a claim based purely on some small print, a technicality.
Legally, okay, prep.
Legally, they might be completely covered. But ethically,
Yeah.
is it right to use that loophole when the customer clearly suffered the kind of loss the policy was meant to cover? The expectation now is clear. Firms need to go above and beyond the letter of the law if that's what's genuinely in the consumer's best interest. Tag A, the new drivers of ethical behavior.
So why this big shift now? I mean, being ethical sounds good, obviously, but in finance, it's often seen as pretty cutthroat. Why has it become so strategically important all of a sudden? What's driving this?
Well, the research points to four major forces, and they're all interconnected. The first one is actually quite straightforward. Stakeholders and shareholders. They don't just see high ethical standards as some kind of optional extra anymore. They view it as a real competitive edge. Good conduct, good ethics. It translates into better profits, sustainable growth, makes the business more attractive overall.
Right, and that feels like it's being amplified by, well, almost a feedback loop, fueled by the next two drivers you found. Information transparency and consumer demand.
Absolutely. In today's digital age, if a company messes up ethically, that story doesn't just stay local.
Nope. It's global in minutes. Social media, news sites.
Instantly. And reputations. Well, they're easy to trash and incredibly difficult to rebuild. And linked to that transparency, you've got consumers who are just much more savvy now. They're better informed, their expectations are way higher, and crucially, they're not just putting up with, mediocre products and unreasonable charges anymore. They know they have choices, and they're demanding better, more ethical treatment.
And the final piece, the regulator. The FCA here in the UK. Our sources suggest they're implicitly pushing firms to operate within the spirit of the law, not just the bare minimum text.
Exactly. They know they can't write a rule for every single bad thing that might happen. So they prioritize consumer protection, demanding integrity right across the board. It's about the underlying principles.
It's fascinating how they weave together. Better informed consumers plus instant transparency. It makes behaving unethically incredibly risky, doesn't it?
Exponentially riskier. Which is why trust isn't just a nice-to-have anymore. It's a tangible, valuable, and yes, strategically profitable business asset. Tag 2. The business case for ethics and concrete characteristics.
Okay, so if ethics is now seen as this path to sustainable profit, let's look at the actual, well, return on investment. The sources seem to frame ethics not just as beneficial, but almost foundational for business.
They really do. When a firm genuinely commits to ethical behavior, the first thing it gains is an enhanced reputation. Customers feel more confident, they believe the business will do the right thing. That's a powerful competitive advantage.
And reputation feeds directly into loyalty, right? Keeping customers is tough. Trust seems like the glue.
Absolutely. Customer retention hinges on trust. If they trust you, they tend to stick around. Now, let's touch on something that kind of sets up our final thoughts later. Staff retention.
Ah, interesting angle.
Yeah, the research here was quite striking. It suggests pay rises. They only really motivate staff temporarily.
Short-term boost.
Exactly. The things that drive long-term performance are more about the nature of the work itself, feeling valued, and, critically, how the business treats everyone, employees and customers. Ethical firms. They attract and keep the best people.
And finally, it attracts money, too. Investment appeal.
Huge growth there. Socially responsible investing, ethical funds. Investors are actively looking for and funding businesses with strong ethical governance. It's a major factor now.
Okay, so we see the benefits. But moving to action, What does this high standard of ethical behavior actually look like in practice, day to day?
We need to pin down some concrete characteristics.
The sources highlighted three concepts that seemed, well, non-negotiable.
Yes. First, transparency. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
Accurately representing facts, providing all the relevant information, not just cherry-picking the good bits.
No selective omissions.
All right. Second is loyalty. And here's a really specific, powerful example from the research. Treating your existing customers the same way you treat new ones when their contracts are up for renewal.
Ah, that's a big one. No loyalty penalty.
Exactly. That shows real commitment. And the third characteristic is compassion and empathy.
Which means?
Thinking about the impact of decisions on staff, on customers, on the wider community, always aiming for the best outcome, sure, but also trying to minimize any potential harm. #3, the FCA framework and ethical failures in practice.
So the Institute of Business Ethics sums this up as the application of ethical values to business behavior. And the FCA lays down the rules, principles for businesses, conduct rules. But, having rules on paper is one thing. How do firms actually make sure their employees live these values?
It absolutely has to come from the top.
Yeah.
Senior management needs to demonstrate genuine commitment. And crucially, they need to involve employees in actually developing the code of conduct.
So not just handed down from on high.
No. The research is clear. If a code is just drafted by execs and pushed out without any real engagement, those values end up having little value to the people on the front line actually dealing with customers.
Right. And what happens when those internal processes fail? Accountability must be key. You mentioned the FCA provides a safeguard. Whistleblowing.
Yes, and it's a protected facility. An employee's identity is guarded. And importantly, they don't need proof of wrongdoing. They just need to report their concerns.
That lowers the barrier significantly.
It really does. It enables accountability when maybe the internal systems haven't worked.
Okay, theories and frameworks are useful, but let's look at a real-world example. When the pressure's on, our sources gave a pretty stark case study of ethical failure. Let's talk about Parwinder. He's an investment advisor.
Right. And he's meeting Edward. Edward is described as financially quite naive, married, 3 young kids, and carrying a pretty large mortgage, £135,000. He's just inherited £75,000.
Okay, so immediate needs there, you'd think. The mortgage, family protection.
You would think. But Parwinder, he apparently completely sidestepped those pressing issues. His focus was solely on getting that £75,000 inheritance invested, and quickly. He just highlighted his own great performance figures and talked up the advice fee he'd earned.
Wait, ignored a massive mortgage and family vulnerability just to push an investment product? That sounds really quite bad.
It's a profound ethical lapse. Parwinder even apparently admitted he felt he needed to give Edward a little push to make a decision. Why? Because in his view, the investment was for Edward's own good, and crucially, good for his own performance figures.
Wow. That justification, everyone's a winner, that takes us right back to the ethical theories, doesn't it? He's focused purely on the outcome.
Exactly. He believed the end result, potential investment growth, justified his methods, even if they bent the rules. Academics call this focus on consequences consequentialist ethics. The ends justify the means, essentially.
And the counter-argument?
Perfectly shown by his colleague Ruth's reaction. She was apparently horrified when she found out.
Understandably.
Her reaction points to a deontological view. That framework focuses on the process, on duties and rules. It argues that certain rules just must be followed, regardless of the potential outcome. For Ruth, Parwinder had clearly broken fundamental rules of conduct. No potential investment gain could ever justify that breach. #TechByV. Mandates for professionalism and ongoing competence.
That kind of failure leads us straight into professionalism, doesn't it? Defined by, the quality, skills, competence, and behavior someone shows. The FCA demands ongoing competence, and the sources explicitly say this includes a good standard of ethical behavior.
Yes, the FCA sets a pretty high bar now for competence. For investment advisors, they need to get a minimum level 4 qualification.
Level 4? Hang on, that's like the first year of a university degree, isn't it?
It is. It really shows how seriously the regulator views the complexity and the responsibility involved in giving investment advice these days.
And there's a time limit?
There is. They have to pass that qualification within 48 months of starting the role. And that time adds up, even if they move between different firms. Mortgage advisors, for context, generally need so. Level 3 reflects a different kind of complexity.
Okay, so qualification gets you in the door, but competence isn't a one-off thing. How do firms and the regulator make sure that standard is kept up year after year?
That's managed through the Annual Statement of Professional Standing, or SPS. It's issued by an accredited body, and it confirms three critical things every year. Does the advisor hold the right qualification? Is their knowledge genuinely up to date? And are they adhering to a recognized code of ethics?
Right. And that up-to-date knowledge bit implies continuous professional development, CPD. What are the rules there?
They're quite rigorous. Advisors need a minimum of 35 hours of CPD each year. And here's the key part. At least 21 of those hours have to be structured,
Structured meaning.
meaning defined learning activities with clear outcomes. Things like attending seminars, formal workshops, specific e-learning modules. Just, reading the financial news or doing research for one client doesn't count as structured learning.
Okay, let's use case study 2 to really connect this competence failure back to an ethical failure. We've got Yasmin, an experienced advisor, and Sandra, her 78-year-old client. Long-standing relationship. Years ago, Sandra was put down as having an adventurous risk profile.
Right, so Sandra comes in for review. She wants to take more income from her investments. But Yasmin makes a critical error.
What did she do? Or rather, what didn't she do?
She didn't do her homework. She failed to update Sandra's client information. She just relied on that old adventurous risk profile from years ago without checking if it was still relevant.
At 78, with likely changed circumstances. That feels like a massive oversight.
It's a fundamental breakdown. Relying on old, potentially completely irrelevant information, especially given the client's age, it's a clear failure of due diligence.
Which is an ethical failure rooted in incompetence.
Absolutely. It's a classic example. She didn't maintain the required professional standard to give suitable advice. She breached Individual Conduct Rule 4, the duty to act with due skill, care, and diligence. Ultimately, it's a failure to show proper regard for the customer's interests. #tag outro.
Well, this has been a really insightful deep dive. I think we've clearly established that in financial services today, ethics isn't some sort of, soft optional extra anymore.
Not at all.
It's a hard regulatory requirement. It's central to being seen as competent and professional, and it's actually a core driver of sustainable business success. It demands integrity, transparency, and that commitment to ongoing learning.
And we really have to emphasize that key point again. Ethical business means consistently following the spirit of the law, not just finding ways around the technical wording. The regulator sets that vital baseline. Yeah, but true professionalism means aiming higher, always putting the client's real interests first, even if, legally, you could perhaps get away with doing less.
And just finally, let's loop back to that research point from earlier. Pay rises give temporary motivation, but ethical treatment and meaningful work. Those are the long-term drivers for staff performance and keeping good people. So if a firm needs to treat its customers ethically to gain that competitive edge, does it then logically follow that it must also treat its employees ethically to actually deliver and sustain that customer experience?
That's a great question to ponder.
So we'll leave you with this thought. What happens when those two ethical duties, the duty to the client and the duty to the employee, genuinely clash? How does a truly ethical firm navigate that kind of tension? Something to think about.